All right. Well, if you're recording, then I suppose we can start. So I guess, how do you want to be referred to? Do you just want me to call you Andre, Ilsir?
Andre or Andres is fine.
Okay, well, I think the first thing we should do is, do you want to just describe Sunset Devils? How do you see Sunset Devils, and what do you see it becoming when it's fully completed?
Tough question. Well, first and foremost, I think it's isometric, top-down cowboy action shooter. That's usually the elevator pitch I do.
Mm-hmm.
With selling point is there's intricate gun mechanics. So the philosophy when I came up with the idea was a lot of top-down shooters. You get a gun. It's mostly just kind of like full auto. You kind of hose down enemies with it, like
Mm-hmm.
shooting like a bunch of bullets down a corridor. And you just swarm enemies with bullets and just overwhelm them. And it's not super like you're not really committing to a lot of actions in top-down shooters. Generally, like
Mm-hmm.
Binding of Isaac, Nuclear Throne. Not to throw a shade at those games. Great
Mm-hmm.
games. They developers deserve all the respect and success. But I was kind of playing those, and I was like, I kind of want to do the opposite. I want to do like, every action you do matters. Every bullet you shoot counts, and you have to like really commit to it and
Mm-hmm.
live with the mistakes if you make any. I mean, in the same vein, like I like westerns, I like cowboy guns. You have to, work those manually. They're not automatic. Kind of like the design philosophy is just everything you do has impact. I guess in terms of the story, that also matters.
Okay.
Like the actions you do have consequences, etc. Yeah, that's kind of what I would describe Sunset Devils like, or what I thought when I came up with it.
Okay, I see. So it's you're sort of taking sort of an opposite stance that a lot of other games have gone, in the sense that you're trying to present gameplay wise, the decisions you make have consequences. It's not something that you can very easily get out of if you find yourself in a bad situation that you caused for yourself, that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. That like
Okay.
it's ultimately like difficulty and challenge. I think like
Mm-hmm.
if you have a difficult situation in a game, then it's all the more fulfilling if you do actually execute it right and you get out of it successfully, right?
Sure, yeah, of course. Did you want to sort of outline the history of the game, how you came up with the idea, and sort of the process as it's gone up until now?
I can try. It's kind of been a long time coming, and
Mm-hmm.
uh, my memory is kind of hazy at times. But I mean, I was trying to like make games in general, probably since like 10 years ago. I want to say, hung around like game dev communities, and mostly try to find a programmer to work with because I'm kind of a dummy when it comes to code. I'm just an artist.
Okay.
Like I'm a professional doodle man. So code is really not my thing, and so I was trying to like collaborate with a bunch of people, and did game jams and stuff like that.
Okay.
Never really led anywhere. Like usually it's just you try to work with someone, and then you both kind of have a different idea of what you want to do, and then communication breaks
Yeah.
down, and didn't really go anywhere. But made a lot of mock-ups, did a lot of like animations and stuff for like projects that I wanted to like try and get off the ground. Um, and at some point, I just thought like, why don't I make like a top-down action shooter, like a western, because I like those.
Okay.
I think I came up with the design for the main character Red first. I want to say like 2011 maybe, and then just over time iterated it, came up with more designs, the setting, the colors, how the game plays, and then kind of just refined the idea over time. It was really like nebulous for the longest time. It wasn't really anything concrete.
I see.
Um,
Okay.
but I want to say like around 2017, 2018, I had like a more solid idea of what I wanted the game to be.
Okay.
Um, Only really been working on it like proper since like 2019, I want to say.
Okay. And who are you working on the game with in total? What's the total crew?
So there's me. I'm the artist, designer, writer for the most part. Like I do all the story and characters. There's Tyler, who's the programmer. He also comes up with ideas and story stuff and suggestions. Like a lot of input that comes from him. So I would say he's the other half of the project. And then we have Sigmu, who's the composer. He's done a lot of the tracks. And Effoharkay, who is also a composer. He's done some of the tracks and a lot of the sound effects in the game. He's mostly sound guy. So that's 4 people total. And I have some more friends that ask for input and advice and like writing advice and do you like this idea? What do you think of this? And it's not just us 4, but uh, for the main crew, it's 4 people.
So are you the main decision maker of the group then? Are you the one who comes up with all of the ideas mostly then?
Yeah, I'm kind of like the director, I would say. Yeah.
Okay. And what sort of games were your biggest inspirations for Sunset Devils? What would you say were the biggest draws you took in terms of the gameplay strictly?
For the gameplay, I would say Stalker. I've sunk thousands of hours into that series. Shadow Chernobyl is my favorite one, probably. I really really enjoy the It's a relatively linear game, but it's also kind of open world, and you're getting into encounters, you're looting stuff. There's like a gameplay loop of like action and downtime, exploration, finding very odd things in the game, and it's kind of dynamic. And you'll see like an encounter somewhere, and you can like a bandit finding a mutant or whatever, and then you can chime in and loot them or kill whatever.
Okay.
It's a very very cool game. How else to describe it?
For the weapon mechanics specifically, would you say that those were something that you drew out of your experience watching a bunch of Western movies, or is that more so something you had from playing other games that maybe inspired you with that decision?
I would say actually less Western movies, really. It's kind of more like I just really enjoy the kind of movies they are, the story, the settings, everything that happens in them. And the guns are cool in it, but they were never like, oh, I want to put a. Well, maybe that's a lie. I do like revolvers a lot in games, so, but it wasn't really like, oh, there's no games with Western guns in it. I have to make one or whatever. It was more like they're cool, but the idea didn't really come from that. I think one thing was I played Receiver,
Okay.
which a lot of people do compare the game with.
Someone had mentioned it in the comments, and I hadn't heard of it before then, but I looked it up, and it seems like a pretty obvious inspiration in hindsight.
Yeah, I really like the idea of the game. I'm me on Twitter. I'm very abrasive. I have a lot of takes, but
Sure.
I did really respect what the game was trying to do with like more intricate gun mechanics, but I thought the controls were a bit too obtuse. Like you had too many keybinds all across the keyboard, and it didn't really feel intuitive how you would actually handle a gun. I was kind of thinking it felt more like a tech demo to me than the real game, which makes sense I think because it was made during a game jam, I believe.
I think I remember reading that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was kind of like playing that game and thinking if I were to take this concept, how could I make it a little bit more like intuitive or arcadey, I guess, in a sense where like you still have the challenge of doing gun manipulation, but it's a bit more intuitive, I guess, straightforward.
It's a bit more gamic as opposed to more immersive.
I still think the immersion is a big aspect, but I just I kind of limited myself to the mouse inputs, like the left and right button and the mouse wheel, and I thought if you cock the hammer, you scroll mouse wheel down, like that's the first thing I felt like you doing the motion
makes
like you
sense.
would. Yeah, like it just intuitively makes sense. You would handle a gun like that. Kind of just went from there, and then figured with the limitations of 4 buttons, that's all you really need. And kind of just went with the idea from there. Like you load each cartridge individually, that makes sense. The other inspiration I would say that's pretty considerable is gun YouTubers.
Okay.
So there's Forgotten Weapons, Ian McCollum covers a lot of like historical firearms, and I basically devoured all of the like Civil War guns, cowboy guns, and anything like weird around the 1800s and stuff. I like very weird guns. I always found really interesting when you cover them because it's like, how the hell do these work? How do you handle them? not gonna take too much away, what kind of guns we're gonna be putting in the game, but Forgotten Weapons is gonna be a big reference.
Okay, okay.
If you watch that channel, you're probably gonna be like, oh, he's putting one of those guns in the game
Sure,
eventually.
sure.
So,
What's your favorite weapon in the demo currently?
I'd say the 6-shooter because it's the most versatile, uh, hardest to reload. Does great damage, and like the fanning mechanic is like really fun.
Yeah, I mean, I love the 6-shooter too. It's great.
Yeah.
It's definitely, I'd say it's probably the hardest to use of all of the guns in the demo so far, but it feels really good when you master it. Would you say Sunset Devils is more action oriented or more adventure oriented, or do you see it more as a combination of the two?
I think it's a combination of the two. Action definitely like moment to moment. I want to, put a really big emphasis on every encounter, and I mean particularly the boss fights too. That's going to be a big thing. If you play the demo, you might get a sense of that fighting Guapo. That
Yeah.
he has his own mechanics and everything. So I definitely want to continue that.
So you see the bosses as a more core part of the full game experience then?
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, obviously also the encounters in between with like
Yeah.
random enemies already are like a huge deal. So they're not like a lot of games just have a focus on the bosses only, and then everything in the middle is like fluff, I guess. I want everything to be significant.
Yeah. Fluff might be a bit of an unkind word for it.
Yeah, but you know what I mean.
So the story, I'm assuming the bosses are going to be linked in a lot with the story, right? About you're hunting
Yes.
down the people that have wronged you in your past, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And do you see the narrative as a very important, integral part of the game, or do you think a player could skip it and be fine?
I definitely think it's important because it's the reason why the main character sets out and goes killing.
Sure.
It's a Western revenge story. I think if people aren't interested in it, they can skip it and still get the sense of action and the vibe of the game. But it is kind of a story game in a sense. There is going to be a lot of themes, a lot of symbolism, a lot of meaning, and if all your actions are significant, I want that to be reflected in the story too. That like
Of course, yeah, of course.
yeah. But I'm just the guy making it. I'm not gonna tell people how to play it. So it's ultimately up to everyone how they want to play it. But that's how I see it.
Sure. So there is one very distinct part about the gameplay that I noticed while playing, is that there's a very distinct lack of RPG mechanics, such as like permanent upgrades. Do you think that the full game is going to feature any of those, or do you think it's going to be more of a straight adventure without any RPG mechanics?
We've actually thrown that around a bit. I'm still kind of torn on it. Just because like if let's say you get permanent upgrades to like your health or your holster, like you get extra holsters to put items in. It kind of changes the dynamics of the or the balance of the game rather.
Sure.
Because then if you have more health, you have to balance the encounters around it, and if you have more holsters, then the item juggling is a little bit easier. So I probably want to avoid that kind of stuff. Definitely no damage numbers or anything like that. The guns are going to be what they are. There's not going to be any upgrading or
Understandable.
that kind of stuff. But we might have like optional items, like equipables or something, where like you get like special effects, or like I don't know, the ring slots in Dark Souls, that kind
Sure,
of thing.
okay. Yeah, that
But
kind of thing.
Yeah, like it's more like a utility thing, and it might change how you play a bit, but overall, like no major RPG mechanics, I think.
I get sort of the idea that you want to avoid things that like permanently upgrade your character's effectiveness. Is like the rationale behind that decision having to do with you want a player becoming better at the game having to do entirely with their skill with the weapon mechanics?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Makes sense.
I think a lot of it is just going to be balancing around the guns. There's going to be guns that are easier to use for people who prefer that.
I think the double action fills that role really well right now.
Yeah, that was kind of one of my ideas. That like double actions are like you just pull the trigger and that's basically it. Kind of like with mean warding, I just kind of thought it would be like the easy mode gun.
Sure.
You know, with some trade-offs, like you drop all the ammo if you reload it. It doesn't do insane amount of damage, but like it's easy to handle for the people that prefer that. So I think that's kind of how I'm envisioning like the balancing and like structure of the game, that like you basically pick the gun you're comfortable with and kind of settle the like skill question or difficulty question that way.
I guess that can feel more pure in a sense, where if you find a weapon you like, it's not like later down the line you're going to come across something that's just objectively better than the thing you have because it has a bigger damage number.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure. So, what do you want to tell me? I don't know if you how much you want to spoil about the full game, but what sorts of enemy types were you planning on having in the full game besides the one in the demo?
We actually have a few like enemies already like sketched out with animation sets and everything. We just kind of ran out of time to put them in the demo, but
Okay.
There's a bandit ninja.
Okay.
Who's like kind of a melee enemy type that's like flanking you and teleporting and like doing backflips and like closing in on you basically, and being a lot more aggressive than the other bandit types.
Okay.
There's gonna be a lot more weirder enemies. Maybe people got a sense of that. I'm not gonna take you know, not gonna spoil too much, but definitely more than just bandits and animals. Whatever we come up with in that context in terms of mechanics.
Sure. Were you planning on having variants of enemy types of like say the existing enemy ones, or is it going to be more so like individual enemies? They're not so individual types of enemies that don't really have variants in the group.
Definitely, I think less variants. I mean, we already have two variants of like the bandit pistolero. Like
Sure.
there's like the blue one that uses a derringer and the gray one that uses a revolver. Just to like distinguish them a little bit. But I think for the most part, I do want them to feel pretty unique. You know, if it makes sense and it saves us some, if we can get a lot of mileage out of like a recolor that behaves like a little bit differently, and it, you know, drastically changes the enemy, then that's something we might do again for sure. But usually when I design an enemy, I just think like, you know, what's the unique thing this guy does, and then just, you know, go from there.
How do you want to force the player to adopt a certain behavior when fighting them, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So what made you go with a top-down isometric view specifically?
I've done the mock-up that's actually on the Kickstarter that's like a side-scroller.
Okay.
Kind of like a Metal Slug kind of game. But, you know, I kind of figured it's pretty limiting. You just have, you know, two axes that you move on. Maybe wouldn't really work for that kind of gameplay and mechanics. Maybe it would, I don't know. And I just thought, you know, there's already a lot of side-scrolling games out there on the market.
Yeah.
So I was like, you know, I want to make a top-down game. It's a lot more open, you know, a lot more ground you can cover. So I was drawing that, and then I was like, you know, there's a lot of top-down games also. Why don't I try something else? And I did a mock-up for an isometric angle, which is basically just top-down, but the environment looks more angled, I guess.
The isometric, I think, is the depth of the scene is drawn consistently no matter how far away it is from the viewpoint. I think is the technical definition.
Yeah, but it's at like a 45-degree angle instead of like looking head-on on like a, you know, the environment. And then I'm like, you know, this actually, it's a little bit more effort to draw and sprite. I'm really not a good environment guy, I think. I'm mostly an animator. But I was like, you know, this looks good, and I feel like I want to pursue this. So I just went with isometric, and there's not really a whole lot of isometric action shooters, I think. Or at least when I, you know, was drawing the mock-ups, there weren't. So kind of just stuck with it, and I think it was the right call.
I think when I think of like Western settings, I think of like flat areas that are not generally don't have a lot of like height to them. So I'm if you had made it from like a side view, I guess I would question how well the adventure would work, because it might be a little bit hard to justify moving up and down elevations in that sort of setting.
Yeah. I think verticality in games is really important. Just as like it just makes it a lot more interesting. You know, like I always like to think of Dark Souls, which is an extremely vertical game. Like all the, you know, the levels are layered. There's like places you can fall off. You climb like castles and everything. So a lot harder to do that in 2D for sure, unless you make like a very movement heavy game like Hollow Knight, where it definitely works, but probably wouldn't work for the kind of game Sunset Devils is. Just, I mean, if nothing else, aesthetically, I think.
Yeah, not Sunset Devils. The Hollow Knight setting justifies it a little bit more, I would think.
Yeah, definitely.
Speaking of style, what were your biggest inspirations visual style-wise for Sunset Devils?
Oh boy. One that people always compare it to is Boktai, which I will definitely say is true. Not when I initially came up with the idea or the concept for the game, but like, I probably played the game like 10 years ago, and then like a couple years ago I went back to it, played Boktai 2, which is like a lot more Western, and I'm like, this game looks really, really good, really pretty art. And
sure.
It's not isometric, but it's like, I forgot the word, but it's like a even weirder angle. But I mean, I looked at a lot of Boktai's art for like references and getting started with my own visual style, and yeah, that was definitely one. I mean, just generally the kind of art I'm inspired by, like a lot of anime, One Piece, I don't know where I picked up the very high contrast, angular kind of style I do from, but I mean, One Piece, Full Metal Alchemist is the kind of stuff I like.
Sure.
I've started watching Hellsing recently, which is kind of similar with how stark everything looks, but yeah, there's probably so many inspirations that I can't keep track at this point, because it's
sure.
It's a culmination of everything I like, basically.
I think that's the way it is for a lot of creative people. Just you're naturally just creating combinations of things you like.
Yeah.
That's definitely how I felt. So, are there any specific inspiration for Red's visual design, or the fact he's a silent protagonist? That probably stems out of Westerns, I would imagine.
Yeah, him being a silent protagonist is definitely, like, because the protagonists in Western movies were usually, man of few words, like Clint Eastwood in the Fistful of Dollars movie, or movies. Harmonica in Once Upon a Time in the West is a huge inspiration, story-wise as well. I think Red's character also is probably just inspired by, anime protagonists, like very wrathful ones, like Guts from Berserk, obviously. People draw a lot of Berserk parallels.
Mm-hmm.
For his design, I honestly just drew a cowboy mummy. Like, I don't know. Makoto Shishio from, what's the anime? The samurai anime.
Not familiar myself.
He's like a samurai covered in bandages, and there's Jack the Ripper from Power Stone, who looks exactly like Red with the one eye bandage and everything. And it's like, this is just a design that's like out there. I didn't particularly draw from anything, but it's like
I think the one eye covered by like a slanted piece of clothing is fairly common.
It's like an archetype. So not really drawing anything in particular, but it was just very funny to me that it's like it's already a design that exists, and just doing it again. It's totally fine.
You probably just ambiently picked it up from all different sorts of storytelling out there.
I might have. I honestly, when I was drawing him, I didn't particularly think of anything, but
sure.
I mean, I might have. Who knows? One of those mysteries where, like, I don't know myself.
Mm-hmm. So, for the game's landscapes and the area the player will be traveling through, do you think it's going to be mostly dusty desert, or will there be a ton of variety?
There will be a ton of variety for sure.
Okay.
I already said on the Kickstarter, but I want to do like kind of foresty areas, like mountainsides, snow-covered areas, swamps, obviously.
Sure.
The kind of southern swamps. Definitely like a lot of variety in the areas I want to do. So not just like, deserts all the way through.
Okay. And do you think the game, if you're going to have all that variety, do you think the game is going to be very linear, or do you think it's going to be more of an open world experience, or do you think it's going to be somewhere in the middle?
Somewhere in the middle for sure.
Okay.
Like I said, like Stalker is a good reference point for that. The 2D Legend of Zelda games, like Link's Awakening and Link to the Past, but like you kind of do have a linear progression with the way you go to the temples and everything, but the maps are kind of interconnected, and you can sometimes do them out of order or in a different order if you want to.
Sure.
So those are definitely like good reference points for that.
Yeah, I guess my brain specifically always sort of draws things back to Dark Souls, and I hear a lot of Dark
Yeah.
Souls in that, where it's more of a there's some variety with how you can do things, but it still does present things in a sort of expected order.
Yeah, exactly.
So I know you'd mentioned a day-night cycle at some point. Is that something that's going to be more managed by the player? Are they going to have to find shelter? Or do you see that as like nighttime adventuring as a more common thing that the player is going to be doing?
Right now in the demo, we have the day night cycle like locked just for the tutorial, for the for the first section of the game, just so like it's aesthetically like fitting, you know. The showdown in the town is set at sunset and everything, but definitely like in the full game, it's gonna be a day night cycle, and I do think the things the player is gonna encounter is gonna change between day and night. So it might be more dangerous to venture out at night as opposed to day.
Okay.
You can, there's going to be a way to skip the time to be, night or day, whatever you want to. Maybe some encounters are going to be nighttime only. If you get like a side quest or something, you have to find it during night, otherwise it doesn't appear. That kind of stuff.
Sure.
So it's definitely going to be like different.
Okay. How long would you expect an average player's playthrough of the final product to take? I know that might be a bit hard to answer, but just a ballpark figure would be fine.
Definitely hard to answer because I had no idea how long the demo would be even, and I was really surprised a lot of people took like an hour to 2 or 3 hours to beat it.
Sure.
Like, I kind of blazed through in like 20 or 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I want to guess like 20, 25 hours maybe.
Okay.
If I'm being optimistic. But yeah, like no guarantees, no. There's nothing I can really say for sure in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the game's going to have a lot of replay value, or do you think it's going to be more of a thing where a player plays it once, and because they've experienced the story, they're sort of done?
I definitely want a lot of replay value, like, things you might miss. I would definitely like to do like a New Game Plus mode where some things just change, different enemy encounters.
Sure.
Harder enemies much more early on. Just for the people who really want to get the money's worth, like they just get a harder experience that's going to really ask a lot more out of them.
Okay.
Maybe more enemy variety for New Game Plus. No guarantee, but definitely stuff I would like to do.
Yeah, that's one of those things. I guess it depends on how much time you have, or depends on how easy it would be to implement, I would guess.
Yeah. We'll see where we get, provided the game gets funded.
Sure.
But, we can always do post-release stuff, like a hard mode after, if it doesn't make it into the full game. Like, definitely, like, we're just going to see what we can do.
Mm-hmm. So, assuming the Kickstarter does get funded, how long do you see the game taking to finish being completed? I understand that's even harder than the last one, but if you could give an estimate, I think that'd be really helpful.
Realistically, I want to say, if you really bust ass, 1 year. Realistically, I think 2 years, just because I would like it to be really be like the full experience that I envision. But if I say 2 years, it's probably gonna take 3 years.
Yeah.
Knowing how things go, I want to say 2 years for now if it does get funded, because we can work on this game forever.
Yeah. And assuming it doesn't get funded?
We're gonna have to put it on ice for the time being and probably try Kickstarter again, maybe after a year.
Sure.
Just work on it in our free time, but I would say it would probably delay it by like a year or two.
And just for the audience, do you want to sort of outline what you have planned for stretch goals if you manage to meet the Kickstarter requirements?
Yeah, we do have a stretch goal page on the Kickstarter. There's stuff like an expanded arsenal with more guns. There's a expanded soundtrack. Like we can just pay our composers more, or work with more composers to get more tracks for the game, more variety. Switch port, different consoles. We can definitely do that, but it's not a priority right now because we're just trying to get the game finished for PC.
Of course.
Secret bosses, like we can do more content that people can find, and then the final one is an extra DLC campaign where like you play the main story with a different character and see like a different take on the story that would, drastically change a lot of things and the gameplay and everything.
Okay.
But that's a very optimistic one. That's the last one.
Sure. Yeah.
It even if the funding goes well and we do hit that stretch goal, which at this point it seems a little bit unlikely, but that would definitely be post-release. We could still do it even once the game's out and it does really well. We could do that still. There's no reason we couldn't. But
yeah,
not a huge priority right now, but definitely something I would personally like to do.
Yeah. And do you have any other artistic plans beyond Sunset Devils, or are you really just focusing on that for now?
Really just focusing on that for now.
Sure.
I kick around ideas here and there. Like, I would maybe like to do like an action RPG at some point. But definitely just not making any plans until this game's done for now.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to kick around, just quote unquote, kick around ideas for games considering they take so long to make. It's kind of hard to just throw something out.
It's also like I've kind of reached a point where I'm not really coming up with a lot of ideas for other things, because then I'm like, if I want to pursue those and make like a mock-up, then I'm kind of getting sidetracked from Sunset Devils. So like mostly really I'm just trying to like come up with ideas for Sunset Devils for now.
Yeah. Well, I think that reaches the end of the questions I had prepared. Is there anything else you wanted to add on the end?
Not that I could think of.
All right. Well, thank you for doing this. This has been really fun.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. I don't know how to end this.